This book is a classic anarchist work. It proposes a different social and economic model that not only fights capitalism, but Marxism as well. The structure and theories are sophisticated, but some of the premises are obviously problematic. I will discuss some key points here to see if you become interested in the discussion itself. And it's a nice rabbit hole to enter for those that haven't gone into that world, so stay tuned. Welcome to Bibliocultist, where I review books that I find interesting in the topics of religion, philosophy, history, and fiction. Please remember, subscribe to the channel, click the bell for notifications, like the video, share the video, comment on the video. Doing these things really helps out and I appreciate it. Also, I will drop my X account on the bottom where you can suggest books. Doesn't matter how strange they are or different. I actually like those types, so if you have anything to suggest, send me a DM. Also, I'm going to put my Ko-Fi account, which is basically a portal that you can make donations to the channel. And again, any amount helps. And also my merch store is there if you want to get something to promote the channel. So again, I appreciate it. In this episode, I'm going over The Conquest of Bread by Pyotr Kropotkin. And this one is by Black Rose Books, 1990. And I've actually had this book for a long time, and every time I've moved, I've lost books, but thankfully this one has survived. You can get any edition, but this one should be available still, or a new edition, of course. Now, Pyotr Kropotkin's main theory and claim to fame is his conception of anarcho-communism, which is this idea that at the end of it all, the purpose of any political progress would be leading humanity towards a scenario where there's no government and human beings can live in a community without the enforcement of a state, so that you cooperate, you exchange goods, you provide services, and everyone shares in a communal basis. So there are different types of anarchism, but traditionally you just had straight up anarchism, and then these forms were just modifications of the theory. So Kropotkin is known for the communism part of it, and he wrote plenty of books on the theory. It is basically almost identical to the end result that Marx is advocating for, because a lot of people don't realize that in Marxism you have this view that the state will sustain power for a period of time, then there's a dictatorship of the proletariat, but communism itself would be the end result in which the state would be abolished and people would commune and exchange freely without a government being over the people. And that is literally anarchy by definition, and I mean anarchy in the sense of the political theory. So anarchists believe in just going straight there, whereas Marxists believe that to get there you had to prepare the field by going through all these processes, especially because Marx had a dialectic that believed that you had to go through steps. That obviously Leninism changed forever because he skipped industrialization and created a socialist state in the wrong conditions, if you were to ask Marx. So now you have a completely different scenario, and a lot of anarchists like Bakunin, for example, he would say that if you created a centralized state that was supposedly controlled by bureaucrats that benefit the workers, that state would be harder to topple than a capitalist state, especially a laissez-faire capitalist state. So that's a conflict, because to an anarchist, going further into the centralization of power in a state is the worst idea you could ever come up with. They wanted straight communism as originally defined. So an interesting issue for sure. Now, the author's premise is basically that all wealth and achievements are inherently collective, and thus the fruits of said work should also be collective. And this is an interesting and important point, because in a lot of ideas that are associated with capitalism and individualism, they tend to argue that it is the genius of a single man. Reminds me of Atlas Shrugged, for example, that same concept. That a single person has the true genius to achieve great things, and the masses are kind of dull and stupid in a way. And that even though people come from context, it doesn't matter, because it is the special spark, almost a metaphysical notion, in the human being that activates its genius and therefore makes achievements. there's a lot of this personality-driven concepts of achievements of human societies. But Kropotkin is saying, no, every single thing you live with and every achievement ever made by any great person was all part of a context. And therefore, it was the product of a community. And artists in the Renaissance, for example, a lot of them didn't even sign their art because they felt it was a collective work. It belonged to the people, so they wouldn't sign statues and things like that. Eventually, post that Renaissance period, and during it, it changed because it became all about the personalities who were doing the art. But originally, a lot of the art was public, so no one signed the pyramids, no one signed the statues of kings, and that kind of thing. So Kropotkin is in that mood. He's saying, look, your parents raised you, your community schooled you, your friends helped you, and then you do anything, well, that is a collective effort, and therefore, because everyone participated, the fruits should be collective. It's an interesting argument, and it's not that bad of an argument. Now, the question is, how does that work in practice? That's a different issue. Now, to prove some of his economic propositions, he argues that modern production could feed the whole world many times over, and that scarcity is technically artificial. And that to me is fascinating because to make the case, he's trying to argue that capitalism is destroying the ability for human beings to collectively grow because it is segregating goods, segregating production, and then destroying said production or artificially altering the pricing to make a profit and therefore affecting all of humanity. Now, of course, the problem with this viewpoint is that it assumes industrialization, which I think is fascinating. Just like Marx, there's a presupposition that society is going to work like a machine with factories and everything working like that, and then therefore there's overproduction, and that's enough for everyone. And that's possibly true in some cases, although it's never absolute, of course. But the problem is that you do have people artificially creating pricing and profiting. That's all true, and it happens today. When I was a kid, I remember we used to go to the supermarket late at night when they were closed so we can get donuts cheap or for free. And then once the manager found out, they actually would put them in a bag and then throw them in the trash and put a lock on the trash so kids couldn't go in and get it. And this always stayed in my mind because I thought it was so crazy. If no one bought the product and it's already old and kids from the street are trying to go and get some food and get some free treats, purposefully destroying them or hiding them so those kids would be forced to buy the product. Of course, many kids wouldn't have the money to buy them anyway. But just the artificial manipulation of these things was always impactful to me. So I get his point. But most societies were not industrialized at the time, and I would say a lot of societies today are still not fully industrialized. So this premise doesn't work in those cases. He's also assuming that the removal of hierarchy implies cooperation. In a weird way, he's echoing Rousseau. But I don't agree. I don't think it's possible to remove hierarchy. Hierarchy is present in all of nature, and you see it in all primates. So it's not like you find a colony of chimpanzees and they're all a bunch of communists, anarchists that have no dominant male that controls the group, as if there's no competition for females and resources, etc. So it is very fantastical, I would say, to believe that somehow if you remove artificial structures in society, it will suddenly become egalitarian. And this is a big error, in my opinion, in his theory. Because if you remove this aspect from his theory, then you end up in a situation, which is that in a community that you have dominant and strong members, they will impose their values and also they will enforce their benefit. And they will try to benefit their family. And this will always engender some kind of inequality. And the only way to stop that would be to create a system that can enforce itself on those that are stronger. And therefore you have a state again. Now, of course, I do agree with his mutual aid critique of Darwinism. And there's another book by Kropotkin that I love that specifically tackles Darwin. Now, because I may eventually review it, I'll just basically state the premise here. It is that Darwin's argument is all about competition. His focus is more on those that compete to survive and overcome, etc. There's a philosophical element underneath it. But Kropotkin is putting it upside down, and it's arguing that really, if you analyze, it's primarily a collective effort of mutual aid. Ants and bees, they all cooperate and even help those that are injured and do extra work to protect members of their own species and tribe and race, etc. So if that is the case, then it's not all about survival of the fittest. There's a component of collective cooperation that has to be considered and factored in. And I think that is a very good critique of Darwin, and not a lot of people make it. So it's a very cool addition to the discussion. So all in all, I think anarchism as a concept is a very interesting thing. When I was younger, I was very attracted to it because it sounded right. It advocated for a hyper-individualism. It criticized the state, rightfully so. It criticized the dark side of capitalism, exploitation, the manipulation of markets, all the things that we know of. But at the same time, it was naive because it tended to ignore the fact that human beings are different and that hierarchy is natural, and there are differences between people, and I mean individuals, but also there are differences between groups, there are differences between genders, there are differences in historic periods, differences in religion, etc. So the diversity dynamic of humanity has to be factored in. Human beings are not a concept. So therefore, once you remove the conceptual aspect of it, then you come to face reality, and in reality, human beings will amass themselves in groups and enforce their ideas and their values and their needs on others. And therefore, the state will always come up one way or the other. The question is how to improve on the state, how to remove states that are parasitic or evil and make good states, but the absolute elimination of the state, it's not possible for all the reasons that I've explained. Now, if you have a different point of view and you think it is possible and you've cracked the code or something, then drop it in the comments and we can discuss it. Again, all these things are part of the psychology of how human beings trying to solve the problem of the one and the many. So, hopefully you enjoyed this review. Please remember, subscribe to the channel, click the bell for notifications, like the video, share the video, comment on the video. Thank you for being with me. See you next time.